Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of The Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Travis Fain, one of WRAL's State House reporters.
So one of the big stories of the week was the Beth Wood saga. It all started, I think it was, last week she announced that she wasn't going to run for reelection when she was speaking to the Oversight Committee.
Yeah, that was a reversal. She was appearing before a committee and said, hey, I want you all to know I'm not running for reelection. It's something that she had promised to do despite some of the issues that we're going to get into here.
Yeah. But then on Tuesday, she was indicted by a grand jury on a misdemeanor.
Doesn't happen often, right?
No, and for misuse of state vehicles for personal reasons. And so I guess they had started looking into her use of state vehicles after the incident last holidays when she had a hit and run situation, I guess, involving a state vehicle. And so they started looking into it, and they found some things that they thought were suspicious, and this ended up in an investigation and then an indictment.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the State Bureau of Investigation is pulling like GPS tracker data on the car that she was using and back in 2021, 2022, I mean, so for years. And they said, oh, she was going to this spa, she was going to dental appointments, to shopping centers. And she says, look, I've been reimbursing. One of the things you do when you're a high-ranking state official is they let you take your car home, which they don't all employees. But there's some sort of reimbursement schedule.
Right.
And she says, well, I was over-reimbursed because I knew, this was an issue. I guess that'll get worked out in court because she's due there on December 4th. And on Thursday, she said, you know what, not only am I not running for re-election anymore, I'm resigning as of December 15th.
Right, which was surprising because just last week when she said she wasn't running for re-election, she said, we've still got, 14 months, to do this. So definitely a big surprise. And congratulations to, it was Chelsea Donovan who broke it, I believe.
Which part? The indictment or there was a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I know Brian Anderson, our former colleague who now does some work for the Assembly as a Substack, he got some anonymous sourcing on that she was not running again. I think Chelsea, the first on the record confirmation of that after we were all scrambling on Thursday trying to figure it all out.
Right. So anyway, on what we know now is that the governor has to appoint someone to serve in that capacity until the next election. And he hasn't said, I don't think at this point, when he's going to do that. I wonder, I suppose there are several deputy auditors, aren't there?
Yeah, and there's a chief deputy auditor, too. Linda Holler, I believe is her name. I wasn't able to get her on the phone yesterday, Thursday. But, someone will continue. There's a large office. They'll continue
to do what they do.
Doing what they do. And then the question becomes, does the governor appoint someone as a legitimate interim, a true interim, or is it someone who's also going to run for the seat and they get a little bit of a leg up? I mean, that's kind of my assumption, is that someone that the Democratic machine headed by Roy Cooper wants gets this appointment and it helps them in the coming election. Because, they don't want a Republican to win this race. And I'm assuming, I have no interviews, I've not talked to anyone who told me this, but surely some of Beth Wood's political support eroded through this process. And someone said, hey, it would be great if we didn't lose this position because you got indicted for misusing a state vehicle. That just seems like a dumb way to go about politics. And again, I'm just speculating there.
Just speculating, but there is so much irony there. Because so many of the investigations that she's done over the years and that we covered involved the use of state vehicles. Right.
And she has. I know of an audit in 2019 that her office did where it was like, oh, there's real lax oversight here, and look at all this personal use we found, but just by kind of looking. So, yeah, I imagine that if you lift the hood on state vehicle use by employees, there are thousands of these vehicles. I'm going to go ahead and guess. I wrote something not too long ago about these high-ranking Department of Corrections officials who are commuting back and forth from their homes. They have permission from the Secretary of Adult Corrections to do so. But, they're commuting, hundreds of miles in a day in, big SUVs. And the justification was, well, we need them to respond, and, there are prisons all over the place. But yeah, again, if you lift the hood on these things, I'm guessing it is a ripe area, and it's a lot of these, not all of them, but most of these cars have GPS trackers in them these days.
Anyway, so Lauren Freeman, the Wake County DA, says she will still prosecute this, and that is they're set for court date. I think is December 4th, although that's always fungible.
Right. And Brian Anderson, we mentioned a minute ago, he has said that there's a draft plea deal. He's got some anonymous sourcing on that, or an anonymous source on that. So, things are probably a little bit in flux with a draft plea deal. But yeah, Freeman will not, the Wake County DA won't comment on that because that's, would be against court ethics, she says.
In the meantime, also was elections this week, municipal elections. And so, we heard a lot about Democrats' wins in other states. For example, the Ohio constitutional amendment, the Virginia legislature, Kentucky governor, Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But here in North Carolina, Democrats, I wrote about this the other day, and it's going to be on the air tonight, had a pretty good night, an unexpectedly good night in a lot of places where they've not been used to having good nights. Thinking particularly here of places like Huntersville, which is a urban suburb of Charlotte. It's up in the northern part of Mecklenburg County. It's been pretty reliably red for a long time, but Democrats pretty much swept all the council seats and the mayor's race. Wilmington, we saw the Democrats sweep all the open seats. We can also go through other towns. There's Mars Hill, Madison, Cooley, which is a little tiny town in Davie County, deep red, ruby red, Davie County, 900 people, and the Democrats swept it. So there's a lot of speculation about what exactly happened here, and it just depends who you talk to. It's probably a combination of factors, but one of the things that Gary Pierce, longtime Democratic strategist, pointed out is that the new Democratic chairwoman, Anderson Clayton, said at the get-go that she wanted to work on these local races, these smaller municipal races. Whenever there's a race, she wanted to have people in it. And the idea there was to get the message out, to grow the bench and grow some candidates, which is something, Democrats lack in a lot of these places. He said, there was some skepticism about that from establishment party folks who thought that doing that would essentially take their focus off of trying to get things together for 2024 and to recruit candidates and et cetera. He said, but it was a gamble, but it turned out quite the opposite. And so you've now got sort of party structures and get out the vote efforts and people organizing in places Democrats haven't done that for years.
Yeah, I am a big believer in logistical success by practicing, which is exactly what you did. You just do it, and then you do it at the next level, and then you do it at the next level,
right.
And you do it at the next level. And I don't know why. I mean, I think that's a pretty common political strategy. It's not something she's discovered, but it seems to be working so far. Miles to go before they sleep on that, though. With city elections, local elections, any election, candidate quality matters so much. I don't know what the lay of the land was on these things. But you look at the elections, and whether you're drilling down or stepping back and looking broadly, you have to think, that was a really good week for Democrats. And I would be concerned if I was a Republican looking ahead, although a lot can change.
A lot can change. And I talked to Catawba College political scientist Mike Bitzer about this today. He said, we'll have to see what happens. For example, they didn't have D's next to their names, right? That's a big one, right?
Right, because these are technically nonpartisan elections,
races.
But the parties get involved in them.
Yeah, and people tend to know. But at any rate, he said, there's obviously something going on the ground that we have not got a handle on, and it might be the canary in the coal mine, places like Huntersville.
Yep, we shall see. Also, voter ID was used in these municipal elections, and it went fine.
By and large, it was not a big deal. We're still kind of waiting to hear. I think we'll have a better clue about that next week when a lot of these boards of elections start going through the provisionals, and we see how many of the provisionals were due to not having ID. But here in Wake County, I know. They've had pretty good luck with it, and they say a lot of it. Elections officials are surprised because they really didn't have any money this year to tell people, right? They didn't, because the budget didn't get passed till October, so they didn't have the money for like a big public education push, what they're going to do in 2024. But in the larger counties where there's more coverage of what's going on in the government, you tended to have more coverage of the fact that you would need a voter ID.
Yeah, and if you have an ID, chances are you're going to have it on you, right? The problem becomes if you are one of those people who needs to get an ID, and you're going to have to do that a little ahead of time.
Or it's expired, or...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so far so good, but the big test will be next year, assuming there's still one federal court case working its way through that could end up changing the rules on voter ID again. But
I heard things said by various media, including I think our station at one point, saying that this was the first election in which IDs were required. That's not actually true.
Yeah, there was one.
There was one,
in between.
2014, I think it was. I think it was a primary before it got put on hold, and then it was in a court battle for. But it is definitely the first election we've had them used under the new photo ID law.
We do complicated things for a living. I don't know that I've ever seen something as simple as, should we make people show photo ID at the polls, yes or no, made as complicated and as convoluted and have as many steps over a decade plus as it has in North Carolina. It'll continue to be one of my pet peeves.
In the meantime, Governor Roy Cooper, he was off in Miami talking to a financial summit, I guess touting North Carolina as a place to do business, was recently in Japan too, and it seems to be paying off.
Yeah, I mean, I don't tie things directly together, but he's obviously focused on Japan, obviously focused on electric vehicles. Toyota recently, I think right at the end of October, announced that they were going to something like double their investment near Greensboro at electric vehicle.
Huge, yeah.
Battery plant they're building out there. Another $8 billion, another 3,000 jobs, which would be 5,000 jobs total. I don't know how you go from let's do 2,000 jobs. No, 5,000 in the space of 2 years or
which
however.
is essentially what happened.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I wonder if these announcements are just kind of held in let's start small and then under promise, over deliver, so to speak. But what do I know? The CEO of Toyota is not calling me for advice.
But I mean, look at how much electric vehicle purchases and usage has grown in the last couple of years. And I mean, somebody's got to be putting batteries in all these cars,
Right.
And I think Toyota sees, and they added a bunch more assembly lines to do different types of batteries for different types of vehicles. So, they say this is going to be sort of their battery, the center of their battery operations in Northern America. So,
And North Carolina, particularly the Cooper administration, is all in on electric cars. We are working very hard to become a hub for this kind of thing. And I mean, that ball is rolling down the hill. That process is going well. It'll be interesting if a Republican wins the governor's office in 2024. What happens there, it seems like the momentum, the die is kind of cast on that process, that this is going to be, however well electric vehicles do in the United States and in the world over the next 20 years, I think North Carolina will be a big part of that story. Will Doran, by the way, our colleague, is working on a piece right now. I believe he's outside typing away about economic development efforts under the governor's administration, and particularly when it comes to clean energy, which has been a real big focus. Honestly, I've heard the governor maybe make the argument on clean energy we economic impact more than I have on climate change. Maybe that's because climate change is kind of, it's kind of an assumed we got to do something. But yeah, he really has made it an economic message.
Well, if you look at, I guess, Paul Shoemaker, longtime Republican strategist and pollster, released some poll results from, I think, Conservatives for Clean Energy. I think that's the name of the group. Sorry if it's not. But did a presentation at the City Club this weekend or this week. And basically what the polling showed is that that's the right thing to do. Said, it's very politically variable whether people respond to the climate change message, right? Or that this is a good thing to do for the planet message. But if you can make it about economics and about job development, you get a much better chance of getting support across the aisle as opposed to just folks on the left.
Makes sense. I believe Conservatives for Clean Energy, is that John Zoka, former state representative, I believe, is the head of that organization.
It may not be the same organization, so I read about it. I was not there. I'm sorry I missed it, though. It sounds fascinating.
Fair enough. Speaking of the environment, PFAS, Lisa Sorg had done some reporting for NC Newsline a while back about, this company, Chemours, that makes Gen X and these other forever chemicals down near Fayetteville, is actually going to be importing 4 million more pounds of this Gen X, which, maybe cause cancer, and I think we're getting close to just dropping the word maybe there. It's in the water, and it's in a lot of things. From the Netherlands, which is, I believe, where their corporate headquarters is. EPA had approved it. Governor this week or recently said, hey, this is getting a lot of blowback. Could you reconsider that? And the EPA will reconsider it. That's the news that I've kind of backed into here, that changed this week on that. So I don't think it's a done deal, though. It sounded like the EPA asked Chemours to pause the importation, while this is reconsidered.
See, I thought I heard about this, although this could have changed, but I know in the past they had talked about importing it to destroy it.
This was to recycle it, which
Okay,
I don't
to recycle it then.
I don't know what that means. At one point we were sending Gen X that was created in the Fayetteville area to Arkansas. I don't remember. Somewhere it was being incinerated, but I mean, yeah, it's
Don't
know. Which, hey, maybe that sounds like something we ought to know more about, doesn't it?
You had a great story this week about a flare-up at the DMV over who gets to make the licenses.
Yeah. Y'all might remember there was a oversight committee, a House oversight committee hearing a little while back where DMV Commissioner Wayne Goodwin, also former head of the state Democratic Party, also former state insurance commissioner, was taken to task a little bit over a couple of things. One of them was, hey, we hear you're going to start printing driver's licenses with black and white or monochrome grayscale photos instead of color ones. Did you notice state law says it's got to be color? And he said, yeah, I kind of wanted y'all to change that, but we failed to actually tell you that. And so if you get to work on that. It looks like, though, that there was some involvement from a company called Idemia, which is the current printer. And Idemia was upset because a new printer has been picked. It's called Canadian Bank. I can't remember what CBN stands for, but it's a Canadian company, and it also prints Canadian currency. Apparently, these grayscale photos are like the latest in security, and there's a polycarbonate like laser engraved. It's this new process that the state wants to move towards. Anyway, long story short, Idemia is protesting the contract award, saying, hey, some questionable stuff happened here. We'll see. The DMV, I imagine, will reject that protest. They usually do when contracts are protested at the state level. And
my favorite detail that you included in that, though, was the fact that they weren't even notified.
Oh, yeah.
That because basically the DMV had sent the letters, the notifications to the wrong address.
Right. So Idemia was allowed to go through a process where they presented, and then they didn't get the contract. And the notice that they didn't get the contract went out two ways. One, by mail to an old address, and two, by email to an address that was off by one letter, and so it wasn't delivered via email.
Come on, guys.
Yeah, it doesn't speak great to the DMV's process here.
All right, and of course, we got to wrap things up with election news, and we learned this week that Bo Hines is going to go run in the 6th again, or was it again? Didn't he start there once?
I think he has announced or for like 4 or 5 different districts over the years, and by over the years, I mean over the last 2 years. Yeah, he's going to go back to the 6th, which
is Mark Walker's to lose. Let's face it.
Yeah, right. I would think so in the Republican primary, and the Republican's going to win because of the way that the district is drawn. Which I guess means he'll have to Hines had moved to the Fuquay-Varina area, I think, specifically to run in the 13th last time against Wiley Nickel, and I believe didn't he move from the Greensboro area?
I believe that was the case. I have not gone back and reread that.
Finishing up law school at Wake Forest, if I remember correctly, which is in Winston-Salem. Whatever.
Anyway, so
Bo Hines wants to be in Congress, y'all. I know that for a fact.
In the meantime, we are hearing, various folks talking about possibly getting into congressional races. One of them is Representative Jared Lowry. He is the Lumbee representative, for first-term Republican from Robeson County. Says he has been asked. Many
have
asked. I know that's one of your favorite things. Yeah.
It's never just like one person asking you to run for Congress. It's always like 20.
How friendly is 8? I mean, 8 is pretty much solid red, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a Republican district. If Lowry would win the primary, he would certainly move forward. So he's considering running in the 8th. I happened to see that today. There's a lot of people considering a lot of things. I'm sorry, we're not going through all of them. But I just happened to see that today. And it was interesting to see he is a first-term Republican in the House. So that's indicative of, he's got some
ambition.
People behind him, and he's got some ambition.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yep.
We should mention, I was just thinking about this the other day, because a lot of times we don't cover primaries as thoroughly as we cover general elections. But when you look at the map that we're dealing with, the new congressional map, basically 12 out of these 13 districts will be decided in the primaries.
Yeah, so I guess that from a coverage standpoint,
yeah,
it kind of dictates better coverage in the although we also, it's a geographic thing, and so we tend to try to stick close to the triangle. There's so much going on. I mean, that's one of the things about these jobs is Oh man,
It's drinking from a fire hose.
there's
and
only
election
so
years are
much.
worse. Yep.
There's only so much we can do, but elections are the time that people really need to pay attention.
Also, we learned that Troxler is going to seek reelection, which I think I was a little surprised by.
Yeah, I know he'd had some health issues, his wife, but I hope that's behind them, well behind them, and he's moving forward. He's going to run for reelection. He is, I believe, the last couple of times, been the top vote getter. So arguably the most popular elected official in the state. I may be wrong whether he's the top vote getter or not. I can't remember, but I feel like, I don't know. I feel that's true, Laura. And as politics have taught us,
I think it probably are.
that's enough these days. Sarah Tabor, who is a Fayetteville crop scientist, she's also running for agriculture commissioner. I've seen her announce it. If there are other folks out there, apologies for not mentioning you.
We should also, I just have to give a little shout out to Steve Harrison over at WFAE for some of his reporting on the Mecklenburg situation. So Mecklenburg is going to be sort of a scrimmage next year. I mean, Rachel Hunt is running for lieutenant governor, right? So she's not coming back. Wesley Harris is running for, I think, treasurer.
Treasurer. Yeah. Economist Wesley Harris.
Economist.
Get it
yes,
right.
That's right. And then John Autry announced that he's not going to run for re-election. He compared it to getting kicked in the teeth every 20 minutes, walking around there, being in the super minority. And he's going to be finishing up his fourth term, and you can't argue with the man.
He's had enough.
He's got a point. And then also you've got Natasha Marcus got drawn out of her district.
Yeah,
or into a new district. So yeah, it's going to be little musical chairs in Mecklenburg County.
Yeah, and speaking of Steve Harrison, he also broke the news today that Satana DeBerry, the Durham district attorney, will be running for attorney general in the Democratic primary. So she'll challenge
Jeff Jackson.
Challenge isn't the right word, because it's not Jeff Jackson's job. He's a congressman.
But he is the highest ranking Democrat who has expressed interest in running.
Right. He's not an incumbent. There will be a competitive, or at least somewhat competitive, primary for the Democratic nomination to attorney general. And there's also, forgive me, I've forgotten the man's name, but someone down in Fayetteville, I saw Paul Wolverton tweet that there is a third candidate in that race. I think on the Republican side, the only candidate I know of is Congressman Dan Bishop. And while we mentioned Paul Wolverton, let's mention that he, after I believe 30 years.
More than 30 at the Fayetteville Observer, has gone across the town to Cityview.
Yeah, Cityview, which also has a partnership with the Assembly, so you'll be seeing him in the Fain Assembly magazine. I've been getting they're sending me hard copy versions of that magazine now about once a month. Me too. So, but luckily I keep up on it online. So anyway, congratulations to Paul Wolverton, and a long time he was a legislative reporter for a long time before he went over to be more of a courts reporter in Fayetteville. But good that we will still see his byline, because he's a very, very talented guy. That's right, and that's all I've got.
I don't think there's a lot happening next week either, but of course we'll be keeping an eye on it, and we'll let you know about it here on the Wrap.